Thank you for joining us. Today, we're talking about responsible data privacy at global scale. We'll look at why privacy by design needs to happen before sensitive information gets shared across study teams and support partners. Joining us are Sean O'Toole, General Counsel and Vice President of Contracts, and Kimberly Heidman, Senior Vice President of Compliance and Data Protection Officer. Sean will kick us off with the legal side of the conversation, including a few important points about responsibility and risk. Welcome, Sean. We'll start with you.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, please allow my personality to leave my body for a second while I read this disclaimer, and then we'll get back to the discussion. So just for everyone's awareness, listening in today, the content provided is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute legal, data privacy, or other professional advice. None of the information contained herein constitutes a recommendation that any particular security, contracting, or data privacy strategy is suitable for any specific entity or situation. Please always consult with a licensed legal or data privacy professional before making any binding business decisions. And please understand that any information that you use from this discussion today is at your own risk and for your own entertainment, hopefully. So thank you. So yeah, as mentioned, the core topic of today's discussion is going to be data privacy in a clinical trial setting, specifically the types of services that Scout is supporting in a clinical trial context, specifically participant travel, expense reimbursement, and stipend payment management. So just all of the different types of data privacy use cases that are involved there and the risks that are inherent in those use cases. So, we have myself with some legal expertise and contracting expertise there, and then Kimberly as our premier data privacy officer, who also has all of the very nuanced data privacy knowledge that I don't necessarily have just from a legal background. And together we keep all of these things straight at Scout and make sure that we're providing our services in compliance with everything. So I don't know if you want to give maybe an initial overview, Kimberly, of just sort of what data privacy looks like in sort of the workflow of a company like Scout and our sponsor clients.
Yeah, I think there's a general knowledge and understanding in the industry that we are handling very sensitive data. Every cog in the wheel of the clinical research industry holds different pieces of data. And sometimes I think there's a misunderstanding that third-party services like Scout that provide payments or maybe travel concierge support, that the information that we are handling, although it is not trial data per se, it is not scientific trial data, that it is not as important perhaps as the other pieces of data that are being processed and held. However, we do have access to the data subjects who are the clinical trial participants to their very sensitive data. So we know who they are. We have information that even the sponsors don't have. We know their names. We, in many cases, tax identification numbers so that we can provide tax reporting support services and documentation. Banking information. While that may not be scientific data relevant to the trial, it is very relevant to the data subject. And that individual, Sean, you and I as individuals, we are very protective of our own personal data, our own banking details. We don't want everyone in the world having access to our email address and our cell phone number. We don't want people selling that data. So it's very important that we're managing it well. And so we at Scout take it very seriously. I know you and I personally take it very seriously that we adhere to the requirements that are globally well known, but also just to the overall well-being of the clinical trial participants and that we care about their experience. People don't want to think that they're going to sign up for a clinical trial that is supposed to hopefully benefit them and their health and their physical nature and be at risk for their financial data or other data. So we first and foremost, I think it's really important that we are able to partner with our sponsors and our CROs to help them understand the importance and the type of data that we're handling.
Yeah, completely agree. And you hit on a couple points there that I want to also mention in a bit more detail. I think the fact that sponsors in a lot of cases won't have this information and sometimes depending on local regulations cannot have that information. There could be either laws or general clinical practice that prevents them from having, for example, patient names because they don't want to de-identify the patient. That would obviously undermine study integrity. So we're filling a very important role just because in many cases, sponsors are limited in their ability to have this information and do this themselves. And so it's very important that they're able to trust us to do this correctly, and especially to be able to do it at a global scale, because in some cases, our sponsor clients or even CRO clients may not have footprints in particular regions. They're running a study there and things are being managed globally, but they may have their internal expertise limited to certain jurisdictions, and they're again relying on us as someone that is providing the travel or the payment services in a particular country or region to be doing it in a compliant manner ourselves. And that's something that we do take extremely seriously, and we do a lot of research. We've done a lot of upfront research and continue to research. I mean, Kimberly, I'd say probably 60% of my emails on a daily basis are new data privacy updates or questions or things like that. And so this is something we're very much on top of on a very regular daily basis to make sure that we're providing that support to our clients in a way that's fully compliant.
And I think that you mentioned about the global scale aspect of it. I would say that probably is one of the areas where we see our sponsors and our CROs relying on us most heavily, and where we see individuals in the space, individual organizations in the space struggling, because it is very difficult and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of resourcing and a lot of time to make sure that as a per se European or US based organization, that you are able to function compliantly in all of the jurisdictions where you're operating. So there's two things. So first of all, we have to be experts in what we're doing in terms of the actual services we're providing. So what are the data points that we're supposed to be collecting in order to process payments and travel and things like that? It's different from what the sites or the CROs are looking at, or the labs or MRI, imaging centers. They're not looking at the same data, processing the same data that we are, although there may be some intersection points. We have to know exactly what data we have to receive from the data subject in order to minimize that data. So there's a lot of these principles of data minimization. Well, what can you actually collect in order to do this? What do I need in order to purchase a train ticket for a French clinical trial participant who's under 14 years old? What do I need, and what am I doing in a compliant way? So what do I need to do? And then how am I doing that at a global scale? Meaning, how do each different jurisdiction, what are the data privacy authorities in that country or in that region? What are the laws that are unique to them? What is, all the way from what we collect and how we process it to, do we transfer it outside of the country? Where's the data residency? All of those are things that you and I and our teams, we've dedicated a lot of time and resourcing and energy to knowing what that is. And I think that's where organizations in our space will tend to struggle. They maybe don't have the understanding of how important this is, what the risks are. And you can talk to us a little bit about what those risks are should we not comply with this. But they don't make the effort in a lot of space. They might say, well, we'll fake it till we make it, kind of an attitude, which of course everybody can relate to in some respects. But for us, that is not a guiding principle. Fake it till you make it is not a value that we have here. We've got at Scout, we make sure we can get it done. But I would be curious, because you talk to me a lot about obligations and risk and why that's important.
Yeah, I mean, the fake it till you make it approach, which a lot of people make in a lot of contexts. It's one of the biggest things I'm looking out for when I review a contract and I'm escalating things internally, is making sure that we're never doing that. Because obviously the risk there is you fake it until you don't make it is what can potentially happen, and then all of a sudden you're caught and it's too late. There's a lot of this mentality. I remember especially when GDPR was first entered enforcement a few years ago, there was a lot of, oh, this is new, our clients don't know about it yet, not Scout's clients, but I was at a different company at the time. Our clients don't know about this yet, they don't care, they're not going to be checking the contracts closely, let's just keep processing stuff, we'll worry about it later when this starts becoming more real. Well, the fact of the matter is when it enters enforcement, it is real. It doesn't matter if it's on anyone's radar or not yet. And so this idea that I can wait until it becomes a problem, well, if you wait until it becomes a problem, it's a problem that you did not prepare for. And so that's one of the biggest risks, is if you don't kind of put your money where your mouth is in terms of contract obligations you're agreeing to, you're setting yourself up for a breach down the line. So we need to be aware of what our actual obligations are in a particular jurisdiction. We need to make sure our contracts that we're entering with clients reflect those obligations accurately. And we need to make sure we can stand behind those obligations as an organization. Do we actually have cybersecurity framework in place that actually complies with what we're agreeing to in the contract? Do we have operational workflows that comply with, for example, the somewhat more strict requirements in France under MR001? There's things that we have to do for France that we don't have to do for other EU member states, or for the US as a completely different jurisdiction. So making sure that we're not just signing off on contracts that say a bunch of stuff and hoping it never comes up, because then when it comes up, you've put yourself in the direct line of fire there for a breach of contract claim with your client. There's also statutory risks. There's things like GDPR. If you breach it, I believe there's 2 tiers of liability. The first tier is it could be up to 2% of annual turnover for your company as a fine, and tier 2 could be up to 4%. So 4% of your company's annual revenue essentially is a massive fine that you don't want to catch just because you were a little bit lazy on data privacy and hoping it doesn't happen. So that can be a company killer, especially because if you start stacking those, if you have multiple GDPR violations, it could be 4% of your company turnover again and again and again and again. And obviously, I'm a lawyer, so I don't know math, but 4% can add up to 100% pretty quickly. There's very real financial and contractual risks, and then there's reputational risks as well. I mean, if you start having breaches in the news, people are seeing, this vendor of X pharma company has caused a massive data breach of all of pharma company's clients. Other pharma companies are going to say, well, do I really want to work with them? Maybe I want to check out their competitors instead, because I don't want to expose myself to that risk. There's also kind of the positive side of that is there's reputational gain if you do it right. If people start to, word starts to spread that, hey, this company is very conscientious when it comes to our patients' data, and our patients' data is one of the most valuable currencies in a clinical trial. That's kind of what the trial is all about. After helping the patients, there's collecting data to hopefully move a drug forward to commercialization. And if they know we're good stewards of that data, that is something that is very marketable. So there's kind of risk and reward, risk of doing it wrong and very substantial reward of doing it correctly. So
yeah. And I've found in our conversations when you and I are speaking with our sponsors, there is that openness to asking the questions of us and relying on us and saying, okay, how do we collaborate? You and I've had a lot of conversations with sponsors where we have to explain the relationship between the data controller and the data processor and what role we play and what are their responsibilities in terms of the data we're handling and their oversight of us. And even, the conversation about how when a sponsor contracts Scout or any other vendor via a CRO relationship, there's yet another nuance that's represented and introduced into the conversation. And so I think one of the things that separates us, and I would call it a distinction with the way our team is built and our leadership here at Scout, is that you and I specifically and personally get involved in those conversations so that we can explain it and partner with our sponsors and with the CROs, because we want to do it right at the outset. I mean, you raised the issue of the GDPR risk involved in terms of financial risk and reputational risk. And the other part of that is we don't want anything to jeopardize the study, right? If we have participants who are on a study and who are receiving care, from these sites, and we have some sort of an issue or a breach or a breakdown, or, there are countries, and you and I could do a whole other session on how your data can be frozen, what can happen to shut you down. You don't want that to happen in terms of the trial either. We don't want anything to jeopardize what's happening on that study. And although it may seem like, well, payments and travel, transportation, managing those various aspects is not integral, it's a cog in the wheel of supporting. It's a part of the whole ecosystem of that trial. And so we take that very seriously, that we don't want to present any risk from our side. So if a sponsor ever has questions or needs collaboration, I think that's the other thing. You work very hard on your team that when we're doing our contracts with our clients, we want to make sure we're collaborating about these things at the outset, not doing it later. Our sponsors don't have to worry about, how we managed the MSA process in order to maximize, coverage. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's it's always a sensitive part in a lot of different areas of contract negotiation. But I think one of the important things here, and you were mentioning sort of the controller and everything a little bit ago, it is important to keep in mind from our client's seat that under law, GDPR in particular, and other local regional data privacy laws, that a lot of the ultimate responsibility stays with the controller, stays with them. So even when you hire a processor or sub-processor, some downstream vendor that you outsource a portion of the trial and the data processing to, you're still remaining the entity that defined the means and the purpose for that data processing. And so you maintain a lot of liability for breach there. Now, there can be indemnification and things like that where the offending vendor would have to make you whole. But again, that doesn't necessarily make reputational risk go away. People will remember I was at, an ex pharma trial and my data was breached. They're not necessarily going to know, oh, well, who was the travel vendor involved in that, the patient concierge vendor. They're just going to remember it was that pharma company. So we will make sure a lot of that is correct, but that does involve risk allocation. So there are points to negotiation where we push back and say, like, no, this isn't necessarily us, your controller, but we do it in a way that's not adversarial. We help them understand, this is not necessarily to get risk off of us. We're protecting you because whatever we negotiate here, this is with you regardless. And we're pointing it out for you. We're making our contracts reflect it clearly, but we're also providing the service of letting you know, hey, this is a responsibility that you as controller have. And that's then knowledge that our clients have as they do work with other vendors. If we have a competitive relationship or we're not the exclusive vendor for that pharma company, they now got that knowledge from us that they can then press, and be careful, and they can ask other vendors, hey, this risk stays with us. So we want to make sure you have, XYZ security measures in place because we can't offload this risk to you. So we need to make sure you're doing everything correctly so that this risk that stays with us is minimized. And I think that's very important. And it's honestly, we have a lot of really good conversations, both as part of onboarding with new clients and actually negotiating the contracts, where we honestly get positive feedback and appreciation a lot of the time, where they try to say like, oh, all this risk is with Scout. And we, have a little comment in the draft contract that says, well, no, actually, GDPR article XYZ says this. And like, oh, we didn't know that. Thank you. I've literally had people send me emails after a contract was signed that they said it was very refreshing, and I'm very appreciative to work with someone who actually knows how this stuff works, because I feel like as much as you were protecting your organization as its attorney, you really helped us learn a lot about this process as well. So
yeah, and it's an important balance because, at the very beginning of this conversation, you, like you said, you suspended your own personality for a minute to give us that disclaimer. And so there's a balance to be walked between not trying to act as I'm not the data protection officer for that sponsor. You're not the GC for that sponsor. They have their own resources for that, but we approach everything looking at every stakeholder. So every conversation that we have, it's a collaborative conversation to share that. And, there's a lot of companies out there that'll say, well, yeah, everybody understands GDPR by now, they're all, but we don't just conduct trials in the United States and in Europe. There are some very challenging countries with very challenging data protection laws that we should be ahead of the curve. We are at Scout ahead of the curve. And you and I really negotiate that sensitive line when we get on the phone with these teams in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, in other places where they're saying, do you know about this? And they're putting us in the hot seat, and we're able to answer those questions and say, yes, we do. Not only that, but the other thing that I found that our sponsors and CRO partners really appreciate is that we support all of our assertions and our confident statements with documentation. And I would say that's another area where I notice, whether it's being certified under the US data privacy framework, the Swiss framework, the EU UK frameworks, partners should be able to supply that documentation, whether it's their ISO certifications or SOC 2s, whatever that might be. sponsors and CRO partners need to be pressing for that, because that's something that any good partner should be willing to put out there. And the one stakeholder that I feel like I've missed, and we've missed in this conversation, is also the protection of the sites, because we handle the sites data in exactly the same way. If it's confidential information from the client, if it's the sites data, if it's the participants data, we want to make sure we're protecting our sites as well and collaborating with our sites. And at Scout, you and I both, I mean, I think today I've got 3 on my desk working with individual sites on how we're going to manage data. We doing site assessments, doing DPAs and things like that. So if you're not able as a provider in this space to really consider all of the stakeholders in that ecosystem, then you're ill-equipped to move forward with managing these studies and supporting the studies.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that all goes into, just to drop a buzzword, but the kind of a privacy by design mindset. Just all of this, having the documentation, doing the research that goes into being able to stand behind the documentation, making sure the coverage is comprehensive in our contracts, making sure we have, we've done homework to, like you mentioned, the data privacy framework. That's a thing that not a lot of people even know about, let alone have. That's, it's part of the adequacy decision that the US is currently under with the EU, so that, technically we don't need all of the contractual terms that we have because we've done that diligence, but just in case, we have all the contract terms as a redundancy, just in case that framework's ever repealed, we're not left with our wheels spinning. And all of this is just because of how much we've thought about ensuring, yes, the integrity of patient data, site data, sponsor data, everything is covered in there. Everything's covered by our documentation. We have SOPs and processes built out because all of this is so central to what we do, because the data, the PII, and in rare instances, PHI are so central to what we do. And so I feel like it's a big red flag if someone, a vendor you're looking at, a provider you're looking at, cannot produce documentation like that, or if you ask a question and they just have, no idea, there shouldn't be an expectation that someone can recite, encyclopedic knowledge on hand, but it's not a good sign if you say MR001 and they're like, what's that? Is that is that a protocol number? What is so I feel like you want to look for people that the knowledge is clear and the homework that's already been done is clear, in just the way they kind of operate and speak to this area in your initial conversations with them.
It's a good distinction that you made. You shouldn't feel like if you're talking to a provider on the phone and you put them on the spot asking a few questions, tell me about data residency in Vietnam, or whatever. Not that they should be able to spout off encyclopedic knowledge. I think are they open to being questioned? Do they say, I don't have that answer here on the phone for you, but let's set up a call, or let me send you the supporting documentation to show that. Even if that's not, like I said, you and I get on the phone quite a bit, and it's much easier for us to kind of spout off that knowledge because it's part of our job. But even down to our program management, our project management teams, our patient liaisons, if they're asked a question, they have a general understanding. They're required to be trained on these things. They have a general understanding and respect for the risk management around data privacy. They're not afraid by any means. They're not worried because they know they have the foundation of support behind them. But any partner should be willing to say, you know what? I may not have that answer, but I'll get the answer for you. And then individuals like you and I will get on the phone and actually collaborate and work with a sponsor. I think the first thing is for a sponsor or CRO partner is to be willing to ask the questions and not be afraid to ask the questions. Press your partners. I always say to the clients when we get on the phone and remember one time we had a call and it was about 15 minutes long. It went so fast. And at the end of it, I think you had said like 3 sentences and you said, well, I'm kind of sad because I was hoping that I would get to go into this long conversation about what was going on, but it was so simple and easy and they understood what we were saying. So we like to be challenged. We like to be asked those questions because it makes us better. So I think that's a distinction for us as well. And I mean, I'll speak for myself. We just enjoy working together. So we enjoy working together on this, and we take it seriously, and we love what we do.
Yeah, and that does help. And I think that I know we're getting close to time, but that raises two distinctions that I think are very important as well, and they're kind of tied together. But all of the work that we do in ahead of time, it leads to situations like that 15-minute call, where as much as, you know, I love the sound of my own legalese, like all lawyers do, we've made this so simple in most cases, you know, as simple as it can be. The data privacy is not simple. That's a misnomer. So I retract that. But we make it as simple as possible by having all of this work done in advance and having all of this expertise built up across the whole company, not just within our two heads, but just across the board. Like you mentioned, training the PMs and everything like that. We are able to answer these questions in most cases, or at least have the skill set to know where to look and how to do the research efficiently, because ultimately there is a study underneath, you know, all this work we're doing. What we're ultimately working for is that the study is able to proceed operationally. Patients are able to get to visits, they're able to get reimbursements, they're able to get stipend payments. The work needs to get done at the front line. And the fact that, you know, we do all of that work and enjoy doing it helps us do it efficiently in a way that's not causing delays, because that's another kind of side of the coin, where some organizations, even if they care and they're fairly knowledgeable, they don't necessarily strike that balance of being able to understand, you know, business and operational realities and keeping things moving efficiently. And I think we strike that balance very well, where we do a good job, but we do it efficiently, and we get things done in a manner that isn't, you know, constantly jeopardizing study timelines and causing visits to have to get missed or delayed or anything like that. You know, we're able to keep things moving because, you know, we care and want to see that happen and understand where the rubber meets the road. But also, you know, we've just done so much preliminary research already. So.
Yeah.